Well, welcome everybody to eighth grade Giants. We've got a great sequence of learning planned for you all this year, and I am really excited to get us going tonight. My name is Dave, and I am you heard me talking with Laura already, but I am the social studies consultant for a lot of folks up north. I cover most of northern Michigan, everything north of Grand Rapids, but south of the bridge. And I also helped develop some of the Giants units, including units 3 through 7 of eighth grade. And then Phil and I have sort of revised unit 0, 1, and 2, and we'll talk about that tonight. And I am joined tonight by the always bubbly and sparkly Dr. Phil Gershmel. So, Phil, say hello quickly. I like to come up with adjectives that describe Phil that make him stand out.
Yes.
So there we go. That worked. Um, Dr. Hirschfeld has also been part of this project from the beginning, and you'll be hearing from him a lot throughout these trainings. Basically, he and I will both model some stuff. His stuff is always really fun. Mine is really dry and boring. So between the two of us, you'll be entertained at some point throughout each evening. But to get a sense of who's in the room, and I will cut this out of the recap so it won't appear in the video recap. I'd like to do a quick Brady Bunch style around the Zoom to have everyone just say a quick hello, my name is, and I teach at from each of you, just short and sweet. But we are going to be a learning community this year. So I want to make sure we do a quick round of intros. We will start with Sean, and then we'll go to Laura, and then it will be Rachel, and then Derek. So, Sean, take it away. Quick, while you're at the stoplight there.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to dive right in. I wanted to take a moment as part of our agenda to get you all acclimated to the Giants units, which includes like where to find them and, all of that. So, I am going to drop a link in the chat here. And I'm going to also share my screen. I have a multiple monitor setup at home here. So if I'm not looking directly at you, it's because I'm looking at the screen that I'm sharing, which is one of my other ones. So if you head to Giants, you're going to see a website like this. And I just put the Giants link in the chat. So you've got that, and you'll want to bookmark it because you're ideally going to be going there often. Before I do this, I just wanted to say really quickly, you all have your cameras off, and that is totally fine. This is a very low impact workout here. So I know that at some point tonight, some of you are probably going to be eating dinner throughout this. Like, we got you. Don't worry. Like, this is totally fine. We have done this 1,000,000,001 times, and our norms are to be super relaxed and super full of grace. So you're all good. If you head to the Giants website, or if you just like want to look at it now from what's on my screen here, the website looks like what you see right now. And as you can see, we've got Giants available for kindergarten, first and second grade. We've got a third grade, a fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, all the way up to eighth. So it covers a lot of different grade levels. We do not go higher than eighth grade right now. I would love to see us develop a high school US course and maybe a high school world course, but the demand wasn't as there as it is for things like the elementary and in some cases the middle school. So you can see all of the different grade levels are there. And to navigate it, you just kind of hover your mouse over the grade level that you want. Unfortunately, that part's not a click. What you have to generally do is click on the sub menu that pops up. So I'm going to share with you the pacing view first. This is the view of the year for eighth grade. The unit lengths did not change, and I don't anticipate that they're going to. But you can see we've got a very short, about 2 weeks, unit 0, and I'll go over what's in all of these units in a little bit here. We've got a slightly longer unit 1, and then unit 2 on is where we really get into the content from the 8th grade standards. Unit 1 hits the foundation standards, and unit 0 takes care of what a lot of US history teachers that I've met throughout the years like to do, which is review of 5th grade, which is kind of necessary. We haven't had kids in US history in a US history setting for 3 years at this point. So when they come back, they don't remember a lot from it because a lot of things have happened in their lives between those. But I do work with a lot of teachers, and I have some that will spend the entire first marking period, and in some cases, I even have a couple that like to spend the whole first semester reviewing fifth grade. And I am one of many people who helped update the content expectations over the past few years, and I can tell you that was not our intent. The standards that we have for eighth grade are meant to be taught over the course of a whole year. So we've developed a Unit Zero, which is a just the facts, ma'am, sort of mini unit that covers some of that stuff. We get a little more review in Unit One, and then Unit Two, we hit the ground running with the first presidents and on. So this pacing view is nice because you can sort of see in a good year, in a perfect year, this is the gold standard, what a year of giants should look like. Now, I do a lot of new teacher mentoring as part of my role at the ISD as well. And one of the things I like to tell them is the gold standard is to get through all of your standards. The first few times you teach a curriculum, we always like to look at the acceptable variation. So, like, it takes 3 to 5 years to get really good at a curriculum. So we will talk throughout this about places where you can shorten or condense units. And people get behind for a lot of reasons. One of the big ones is, of course, the months of January, February, and March. Those of you who have been teaching for a while remember 2017 when we had the polar vortex and the bomb cyclone, and we had 27 snow days. Actually, I think that was the year we were rolling out eighth grade giants last time. So hopefully that's not, hopefully we don't get a repeat of that. But so people tend to get behind at some point in the year. So we will always in these units talk about places where you can cut if you need to. We won't tonight because these are fairly short units. So anyway, this pacing view shows you that rough map of how long each unit should be. And then each unit has its own individual landing page. So here's the landing page for Unit Zero. We have a unit overview. We've got 3 lesson overviews. The unit overview is your 10,000 foot view. So when your administrator says, hey, what standards are you teaching with these units? The unit overview is a great place to go because you can see the compelling question that the unit is centered around, which in this case, when is revolution justified? You can see the content expectations that we are addressing throughout the course of this unit. You can see the C3 framework with the new standards. The big new thing is inquiry-based instruction. And the C3 framework brings that in. So these are some of the C3 indicators that we utilize. And then you get a bird's eye view of what each lesson is about. So each supporting question is the focus of one of our lessons. And if you noticed 3 lessons and you're like, hey, great, where's the rest of it? Our recommendation is generally a good rule of thumb is to look at how long a unit is and look at the number of lessons and divide by 3. So it's kind of hard with this first one, but if you start looking, the units start to stabilize at about 6 weeks. So look at the number of weeks and divide it by the number of lessons. That's about how long you'll spend on each lesson. So in a 6-week unit with 3 lessons, you'll spend about 2 weeks on each lesson, if that makes sense. So just kind of file that away, and I'll remind you of that too as we go through all throughout this year. As you drill down a little bit further into these units, you will notice you've got lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. So you're going to visit this when you first start a unit, your unit overview, but you're going to live in the lessons. We give you the compelling question again. We give you the supporting question that the lesson is centered around. Again, this lesson is just hitting this foundation standard. We give you some learning targets, C3 indicators again, and then a 3-column format basically tells you, these are the steps for the lesson. This is the gist of what you should be doing with students. We take the opposite approach of the Oakland units where they very much spell out like step 1, greet your students as they walk in the door. Step 2, use a seating chart and have students find where their new seats are. Step 3, go over your classroom rules and expect. We don't do it that way. We basically think that you guys know what you're doing, and we like to give you the gist of what the activities could, in fact, be. But as Laura mentioned, like their school is using parts of it and not others, and that is also part of the intent of these units. You can teach them verbatim, or you can use them to plug holes, or you can mine them for resources. So all of that is good. So we give you the gist of it, and then everything we need to teach the unit is available in this other column, the resource column. So I'm going to get into my open book in just a minute, but that's sort of how the units are structured. At the end of each lesson, we have an idea for formative and summative assessment. And these are things that you can do when you've closed that 2 weeks of learning, or that, in Unit Zero's case, that day and a half of learning, to kind of see where they're at. And then the brand new thing now is at the end of each unit, we have some assessments that we've developed. And these assessments are pilots. So they're a good way to get started, but they are not complete. They haven't been tested in this format, by very many people. So it's a starting point, and I will go over those a little bit more in just a little bit. So before I move into the next part of the agenda, which is to give you a little bit of look into OpenBook and how it plays with this, does anyone have any questions on our bird's eye overview of the units? I'm going to pause and I'm going to take 3 deep breaths, and you can either throw it in the chat or unmute and ask. There we go. I learned during the pandemic, wait time in a Zoom, 3 deep breaths is about perfect. And if no one does it by then, by then they've found the mute button and everything else. So another component of this that is optional is you will see in some cases we utilize my open book, the Michigan Open Book Project. And the Michigan Open Book Project, I forgot to download the 8th grade book prior to this, but I downloaded the 5th grade book, and it looks very similar. It's all set up the same way. The My Open Book Project was a free digital textbook project that the state of Michigan helped fund as part of the Technology Readiness Infrastructure Grant. And I served as project manager of that for a few years, and we developed a set of K-12 books. And the books, the joke I made last night is you've got the which came first, the chicken or the egg. Well, in this particular case, I'm a firm believer that the egg came first, and my open book was the egg. And then after we released the books, we started hearing from teachers, hey, love this. This is great. I'm super glad that we've got this because our textbooks are falling apart. Hey, where's the teacher resource kit that goes with it? And my answer to every one of those emails was, we had money to develop the books, but not the resources. And so the Giants project stemmed from OpenBook, and from that need to have a resource kit that goes along with some of the books. So we will reference the open book materials constantly throughout these units. We'll say chapter 8, section 1, or chapter 1, section 2. And you can use open book, or what's great about history is we're covering the exact same topics we're covering the exact same topics in history class. And each textbook is going to cover those same topics. So if you have a book that you really, really like, you can ignore every time we say utilize open book. If you don't have a textbook, open book is here and it's free and it's linked directly in the units. And so it's all there. And it's a digital textbook. It's set up with questions as the guiding focus here. We also have a lot of interactive content that is available in the book. And in a lot of cases, we also bring it over to the 8th grade or to the Giants units as well. A lot of Dr. Gershmel's stuff is in both places. So it's another nice launch pad for that. And we do still update the books. So if you use them and something goes dead and it doesn't work anymore, there's a bug report in these books, and they actually go to a real person. They go to me. I don't get as many of them as I used to get, which is either a good sign or a bad sign. But if something breaks or a link goes dead, just shoot me an email and I will get it back up and running, usually pretty quickly, unless I'm presenting. If I'm presenting, it'll have to wait until later. But a lot of the times, if I get a bug report, it's fixed within an hour. So just know all of that is there. And so we will also provide you, when we reference OpenBook, we'll provide you some guides, some like reading guides to go along with it. So just know you are free to use whichever thing you want to use. If it's OpenBook, great, that's free and it's aligned and you won't have to do any extra work. If it is your textbook, the reading guides will still work with a little bit of modification. So just keep all of that in mind as we go throughout the year. And look at that, I'm only 1 minute behind schedule. So with that, I'm going to switch over to the Unit 0 overview, which I started to do as part of the intro units here. So our first unit, as I mentioned before, is our 5th grade review. And we really just pick up with the Revolutionary War. And we pick up with the Revolutionary War by, in this first one, kind of in the first lesson, the supporting question, so we're talking about through this whole unit, when is revolution justified? This first lesson is going to really get into why did the colonists decide to declare independence? So we're not doing a review of the French and Indian War. We're not doing a review of any of that stuff. If you need to backtrack a little bit further, you can look at some of the stuff we put into the 5th grade Giants units, but really we need to hit the ground running with the 8th grade content. So Phil and I and the original writers decided, you know what, a little bit on the revolution is really good because it leads nicely into the Constitutional Convention, which then leads nicely into the 8th grade content. So our first lesson has this activity that you're going to see from Phil in a few minutes on where do we put our colony. This exists in every grade level, and Phil will talk a little bit about the purpose behind it. And then our original authors had this stuff on vocabulary here that we left in, even though we do a little bit less with it in future units. And then we get into some of the founding ideals. So this one really gets into when they declared independence, what was their justification? So if you think to like English class with a claim and what evidence do you have, we start to get into some of that evidence. And then in lesson 2, we really get into more on the specific reasons for separating from Great Britain. And so in this case, we use the analogy of a breakup letter, and I'm going to go through this throughout. I have even included references for my Broadway fans to Hamilton in the 8th grade units. So we use in these early units some callbacks to Hamilton in a variety of ways, which are really, really cool. I've seen some of these lessons in action since I added them to these units a year ago. And it still, even though Hamilton isn't the phenomena it was in 2016 or 2014, 15, 16, those years, kids still really like it, and it makes some of the other activities that we had in here sing a little bit better. Forgive the pun. So the second lesson really gets into those reasons, and we use the analogy of a breakup letter. And the third one is our mini Revolutionary War review. What were some examples of conflict and cooperation that resulted from the American Revolution? That's a really important question to lead into the Constitutional Convention, because we've got this period with the Articles of Confederation and it fails. And some of these relationships and things that developed here, come into play during the Constitutional Convention. And the whole theme of 8th grade is this can that we keep kicking down the road. That's the analogy we use in these units. So this one really gets into the Revolutionary War. We do a little bit of review on that, and then we're hitting the ground running with Unit 1, which gets into the Constitutional Convention. And I'm going to do a little rollout on that in a few minutes. But first, I am going to turn things over to Phil, who's going to kick us off with one of my favorite activities from all the units, the locating our fort. Where do we put our fort? Where do we put our colony? Sorry, I copied that directly over from 5th grade. So where do we put our, actually, I think it's wrong in the other one. My bad. I'm going to turn it over to Phil, and he's going to do a really cool activity on where we locate something. And take it away, Phil.
Now you ought to see about 1 million buttons right now.
I see 1 million buttons right now.
Yeah, this is a new website, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on. But basically, it's a way to access all of these where do we locate games, because in 3rd grade, the kids are trying to figure out where to put an indigenous village, and in 4th grade, where they're going to put a French fur trading port. In 5th grade, they're looking about where they're locating an initial colony. 6th grade are looking at a homeland area in China because it's a world geography. 7th and so on. And in 8th grade, we're building a defensive fort. What these are a very carefully graded set of simulation activities. The maps as you go up here get more and more complex. because the point of the activity isn't really to teach how to read maps. It isn't to teach anything particularly about port location. The point of the activity is for you to have a discussion with your students, a discussion that A, makes social studies seem like fun because they're busy trying to see how they're going to protect themselves against some bad guys here. And at B, it gives you a chance to diagnose their prior knowledge about geography in general, about history in general, about how you reason about past events, and to diagnose a little bit about their map skills. And so we're using grade appropriate map skills. Now, Derek mentioned that he's teaching through a whole handful of grades. I have to admit that my background is the reason that this page looks like it does. My father was the principal of a Lutheran school teacher and taught 7th and 8th grade at the same time. And I started my teaching career by teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in a 3-room school, where there was one other teacher doing K-3 and one was doing 4 and 5, the lucky one. And so I keep thinking one of the things that we have lost over time as our schools have gotten bigger and more carefully organized and so on is this linkage between the grades. So you might actually want to wander out this website sometime and see what the activities are at earlier grades, especially if or if not your earlier grade teachers are using Giants. And you might want to borrow some ideas from them. I mean, go all the way back to the Summer Village in 3rd grade to see what they're learning about Michigan when they do that. Because these activities are all set in a real place. Like I say, they do have some content knowledge, but the point is not to do the content knowledge. And with that, I'm going to just turn one of these on. I would ask for a second that if you are sitting in front of your computer and you've got your camera, that you turn it on, because I might want to ask you to vote with your fingers sometime along here. Like I say, if you're not, that's no big deal. But if you are, so thank you very much, Lauren, that I at least get one person's eyes looking back at me somewhere in here. What this is a simulation about how you consider geographic conditions and connections when you do something in history. And it is about, therefore, the difference between the geographic and a historic perspective. So this is a real place. For about 10 years, I worked in New York City, and a lot of New Yorkers would know this instantaneously, exactly where it is. We're keeping its identity secret for now. You're allowed to think about it for a little while, but your point is to focus on a more important question. How do people think about where they're going to locate something? And that could be anything from a fort in history to the people in Marshall arguing about where to locate a factory that's going to make electric batteries for electric cars, you know. It's a question, it's a citizenship question. You can tie it directly to civics blitz because, in fact, this is modeling a civics process of making a decision. And that means it's going to tie into the decision about how to write a constitution a little bit later on. That's the kind of thing you ought to have in the back of your mind as you're thinking about how you're making a decision, not just what decision you're making. So with that, here is a map, and the resources that you've got in Giants will give you several versions of this map that you can print up and give to the kids if you want. And you're going to build a fortified city on this map here. You don't have a cell phone. This is back in Columbus's time. In fact, you could actually stop here and ask the students, what else don't you have that might play into this decision. Here's the map of the area that's around your homeland. It's about half the size of Great Britain, which means it's just about the size of Michigan. And the map maker followed a usual rule. Now I'm going to stop on this frame for just a second, because you might not think that 8th graders need to see this frame. And it's a good example for me to tell you something about our PowerPoints. They are all too big. And I'll repeat that. Every one of our PowerPoints is too big for a very simple reason. I looked at your computer keyboard and I noticed that it has a delete key on it, but it does not have a create key on it. We've run this activity with literally hundreds of teachers. If a teacher suggested something like a frame like this that talks about the colors on the map, we went ahead and put it in on the theory that if you don't want to use it, you can quickly delete it out of your presentation. But if you did want to use it, you don't want to make it from scratch. So PowerPoints tend to be a little bit too long because you're encouraged to edit them. That being said, your scouts have suggested 5 locations for your fort. Which one would you vote for? So take a look at the map and hold up, it's 5 for a reason, so that you can hold up the right number of fingers. Where are you going to build your fort? I've got a 1 and a 2 and a 4. And that's great. This is very typical in a class to have some subdivision. You can make an ELA click out of this right now and have them write a paragraph explaining why they want to do it. In fact, you could stop this presentation right now, have them write a paragraph at home defending their reason, and come back tomorrow and start over again. In other words, there's a whole lot of flexibility in using this game. But asking you to vote after looking at a really simple map exposes a real basic dilemma. That the only advantage of a democracy is that people can't blame anybody else when they get what they vote for. But it takes a lot of time and effort in order to get the knowledge that you need to make an informed vote. So what else would you like to know? And again, this is a good stopping point. You could have the students actually write up why they wouldn't have, what kind of information they'd like to have. The PowerPoint then goes on into a long, medium section about how do we define a location, because in your brain, and therefore on a map, the idea of location actually has 2 parts. One part is, what do we have right there? The physical and human characteristics of that place. And there's actually a Glick in 8th grade that says exactly that. Is it cold? Does it have trees? Rainy, hilly? And then it says, can you name one that does not flash on the screen? This is where you begin to see whether they understand the concept of conditions. Then it repeats that for the other network, which is in a very different place in your brain. And that's how a place is connected with other places. Is it got a road? Is it upstream from something? Is it close to something or far away from something? And again, it asks for examples, but you may not want to ask for the examples. You might just want to run a quiz like this. Is fertile soil a condition or a connection? Point left or right? Bingo. How about the upstream from the swamp? So now here again, if you don't think that this quiz is needed in your grade level, by all means, delete all these frames out in here and get on to the point. So I'm going to just go ahead and race along. Is it easier to see conditions or connections from a simple map like this? So now I'm going to add a couple conditions. Here's a river. And you've already built the town next to that river there. Would you still vote for the same place? To build your fort, now that you know that you already have a town, what place, where will you build your fort now? Hold up your hand. Now we got two people voting for a fort on the same river, I gather, right? Okay, I've added some information about cropland. Does that change your mind? And then I can add some information. E stands for some enemies, and they happen to be located in the middle of the best piece of cropland around here. And they have threatened to attack you. Now where do you want to build your fort? I've got 2 5s and a 3 now. And you can actually say, we're going to have a debate right now. We're going to put this in, as a vote in our Congress here. They don't have a Navy. Does that affect what's going on? Now I've added some information about where the mountains are. And you can see how we're doing this like this. Now there's a clickable map that you could do these in a different order if you wanted to. We'll talk about that later on in the second part of this thing. I've now added a few more rivers to the map. What location would you choose now? And now a really big complication. A very strong enemy has just come and built another fort at this location. Now where do you want to build your fort? So now we've got people at 4 and 5. Do you know where this is, by the way? I mean, I told you this is a real place. Well, again, a chance for you to continue a review with your students if you think they need it. Then have them compare the conditions at places 3 and 2, and then have them compare the connections at place 1 and 5. And you can diagnose whether they really got those ideas there. And then it goes on to talk about the real place. You get an idea where it is now? Bingo. And where were you choosing for a fort? At the end, you've got, well, it goes on and explains it, that this is New Amsterdam, the Haudenosaunee people that were the enemies were living up in that area. Buffalo got built over there. And place 4 wound up being Fort Stanwix, which is a key place in the French and Indian War and again in the Revolutionary War. And then something that the French built called Fort Carillon, and then that later on became Fort Ticonderoga. And that is, in fact, the place that we can visit pictorially if we want to. Now, this is an extremely well-designed star fort, surrounded on all sides by a swamp that made it very hard to attack. Located at the end of a long lake where the cannons that were there would control whether any ship could arrive by that lake. The problem is, cannon technology had evolved a little bit between 1750 and 1775. And one of the effects of that was that the British were able to put a cannon up on the top of that hill and reach Fort Ticonderoga, and the fort essentially failed because it could no longer defend itself against the new military technology. And that led us into the Battle of Saratoga. And it's a way that you can use a game like this to help review some of the things that they should have learned about in fifth grade, but you're not sure that they remember over here. But it also points to the very strategic importance of places like Stanwix, Buffalo, Albany, Fort Ticonderoga, and so on. The point being that if students are trained to look at history as a result of the decisions that people made within the context of what they knew at the time, it engages a whole lot more of their brain power and they can remember things a lot better. And with that, I'm going to say, do y'all have any questions about how to run the game? Because I think I've got about 30 seconds left.
Not a question, Phil, but I wanted to point out for Rachel and Derek's sake in particular that we have this same game in seventh grade. We've got the same grade in fifth grade. So the whole thing, what you just went through, it's set up exactly the same way. You ask the same questions, you stop at the same places, but all of them are different places. So even if kids have done them in previous grades, it's always a different place. So
and with a more complicated map and a more complicated geographic or historic relationship between what was going on at the time. And then Dave has turned some of these into an online game. And I don't know if you want to talk about that now or just make that part of the discussion later on if people want to stay around after 6:30. Up to you.
it's actually part of where I'm going next. So I will.
In which case, I should stop here.
Yeah. And I am just making sure I'm sharing the right screen here because again, I'm landing planes with the monitors in my office here. But yep, so this is the same thing Phil was just showing, but in this particular case, the 8th grade online game is the same thing that you just went through, but it is a student interactive version. We do not recommend having kids just do this without you. The fun is in the discussions. The power of the activity is in the conversations. But if you have them follow along with you throughout this, what's nice is we built it from the student mind. And this can also be used after you've done it as a review. So if you wanted them to review it again later, they can go through this. And so you just keep clicking and going, and you can see all of it is here, and here's your place, and not have a cell phone, and yada, yada, yada. So it goes through. And what's really cool is it allows the students to vote. So like I picked 3 throughout a lot of this because I completely forgot that it was in that was in the middle of the mountains. So now you can see the advantages, see the disadvantages. So this can be a review game. What are those advantages? What are those disadvantages? Moving forward, what else would you like to know? So it mirrors what you're doing as the teacher, but it's done from the student perspective. So like the conditions, instead of flashing across the screen, the conditions you bring up with the hovering over the question mark. Same deal with connections. And then every time you get back to one of those choices, oh, we've got the quiz here as an actual drag and drop quiz. And then when you're done, they can check their answer. They can either go back to the quiz or they can move forward to the next slide. But every time the students make a choice, it saves their answer. And so the next time it comes up, it says, would you still vote for site 3? You know, because that's what I chose last time. The big caveat here is if you do this over multiple days, it doesn't save. Every time they refresh their browser window, it's a new thing. So if you're doing it over a couple of days, you know, have them leave that tab open on their Chromebook or their iPad and go back to it, and it'll still be saved. But if they refresh or if they go out, it doesn't save. That's beyond my programming skills right now. But the joke I told last night was I have 9 more bloodborne pathogen videos before I'm eligible to retire. And at that point, you know, I might have time to learn some harder core coding. Phil's second career after retirement became developing educational resources, and I would love to follow in his footsteps and keep building off of his work when I retire, when I have more time to learn some of the parts that I don't have time to learn at this point in time. So just know that these online games are here. They're all in one place. I'm actually going to put the link to this in the chat right now to where you can get all of them in one place, just in case you want it. But it's also all linked in the unit. So if I go to this, if I go to Unit 0, Lesson 1, you can see there's the presentation that Phil just did. Here's the map that students can fill out as they go. And then here's the specific interactive version that goes along with it. And then here's also the link to that landing page that has all of them if you wanted to share them with colleagues at other grade levels. So the next part of mine, and we are approaching a break. Now we are doing these in 2-hour sessions versus the 3.5-hour sessions that we used to do. So we're only doing a quick 5-minute break when we get there, because we got to keep motoring through. But before we move into that, I wanted to share with you really quickly that as part of this, we talk a little bit in these units about the themes of history. These were a thing that personally, they're not my favorite, but they do a nice job at helping kids sort of think about, okay, what theme are we dealing with here? So these stretch back to the standards and benchmarks days, which is 2 content expectation updates ago. Basically, the things that launched my senior year of high school in 1996, those are the themes of history came out of that work. And while it went by the wayside with our 2007 and 2019 updates, Becky Bush, who used to spearhead this project, really, really liked the themes. And one of her mandates when Phil and I took over from the 8th grade writers who left midway through was we have to include the themes of history. So we've done this. And if your kids need a great way to sort of conceptualize history overall, like, is this dealing with technology? Is this dealing with cultural traditions? The themes are nice, but they can also appear as one more thing, which is why I don't necessarily like them. I think we've got some other tools that do them a little bit better, but the themes are used and referenced throughout the units in a meaningful way. So if you do choose to use them, just know that we included them for you to take a look at, because anyone who's been in education for a while knows that what's new is old is new is old is new is old, and it will always resurface with a new name and a shiny, fresher coat of paint. But so the themes of history are in here, and we do our best to sort of reference them as we go through. And so what I really want to get into, though, before we go to the break, is the breakup activities. So I mentioned that Unit 1, Lesson 2 really deals with this breakup. And so it starts right off with a breakup letter. And we've included a sample one here for kids to sort of take a look at and piece through. So, dear KG, the savvy teacher knows that this is really in reference to King George, but right now we're leaving it a little anonymous for the students. I'm not sure how to start this letter, but I feel like we need to talk. I've been thinking about us a lot lately. Things used to be so great. It was like we were, oh, good Lord, I forgot what that acronym means. But I mean, everyone said it was perfect. I thought we'd be together forever, but then things changed. A relationship should be give and take. So kids get to actually read this letter, and you get to have some conversation about, like, what are they kind of upset about, and anything you noticed from this letter. So this unit starts out right away with sorry, but it starts off with this letter and sorry, but us is over, which is kind of neat because there's a little foreshadowing there too. But when you go through this with students, it was written by the original authors as a teaching moment, as a teaching tool to kind of get them to think about the notes that they pass in class and then sort of apply it to some of the history that we're studying. But what happens next after you go through the breakout letter is we took this Too Late to Apologize video from the Open Book Project, and we plopped it down here as well. This is another one that disappears every couple of months and reappears. So just know that if this goes away, I don't think it's going to go away anymore, because this is the group that owns it, and it's on their official YouTube page now. But it's really kind of cool, and I'm just going to play a quick clip of it after this stupid ad. There we go. All right, so it is a music video set to Too Late to Apologize, but over the Declaration of Independence. See the call back to tea there. You got your quills. He looks mad. All right, and that's as far because I don't want Google to. I had to go through some fun copyright issues with something from the 6th grade this summer. So that's as far as I'm going to go so that Google doesn't flag it as being copyrighted content. But we also include the lyrics to this song in the breakup letter. So kids can follow along there too. And you can see the lyrics halfway across the globe. We're standing on new ground, screaming across the waves. You can't hear a sound. There's no fair trials, no trade, no liberties, no tea. We've colonized America. We won't stand for tyranny. So this again is reviewing and leading up to the Declaration of Independence, obviously, and it's done in a way that we hope sort of speaks to students here. Now, I keep going back to the wrong lesson, so I'm just going to close that tab. What's next is you get into the online copy of the Declaration of Independence. So these are the preface activities that you do before you actually do a close read of the Declaration of Independence. So we link to it here. There's a handout that follows along with it that might make it a little easier for them to sort of parse through and figure out. And then, yep, so it's kind of a reading guide that kind of goes along with it. And then from there, we move into some really fun stuff. So I mentioned that we use Hamilton throughout the early parts of the 8th grade units. And so we have here included a link to You'll Be Back. Because after we read the Declaration of Independence, what I really love about this unit is after reading the Declaration of Independence, we then get into King George's response. And so we start with You'll Be Back from Hamilton. What I like to do with kids, I'm just gonna, again, show the first like 10, 15 seconds. Or partway through, I guess, if that's where it was. Forever and ever. And what I like to do with kids, because when Hamilton came out and we got some of these clips available, not before the whole thing was available, I would go in and I would model some of this this whole sequence right here in some 8th grade classrooms. And what I love about this is when I show this, they're kind of chuckling, they're laughing, they're like, ah, ha, 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 ha. But afterwards, I'm like, guys, how did he come off? Like, what vibes are you getting from this guy from this song? And they're like, well, he seems kind of like the dumb, abusive ex-boyfriend. And I was like, oh, it's kind of interesting that you say that, because then in these units, when you start to read King George's response to the Declaration of Independence, and you go through and you read some of his words here, he even comes off here as the abusive ex-boyfriend. So it's really, really neat. And it took some digging to find this. But this is his kind of address to Parliament after the Declaration of Independence. Gentlemen of the House of Commons, I will order the estimates for the ensuing year to be laid before you. It's a matter of real concern to me that the important considerations which I have stated to you must be necessarily be followed by the great expense. I doubt not, however, that my faithful Commons will readily and cheerfully grant me such supplies, because I'm the king, for crying out loud. Of course you're going to do what I say. As the maintenance of the honor of my crown, the vindication of the just rights of Parliament. Like, he just drips as you go through and read this letter with your 8th graders. He just drips jerk. I won't say the word I was thinking, but he just drips jerk throughout all of this. So at the very least, I recommend reading King George's response to the Declaration of Independence with your students as you go through this unit. But I also recognize not everyone is going to be able to show clips from Hamilton throughout, even though we have done our best to provide you the clips that are free of swear words. So it's up to you. You guys know your students better, whether you include the Hamilton components of some of these early units, but you can still do them without, because the original units launched without these. They were just an added bonus piece that we added into them over time, because we really felt it helped make some of the concepts we were trying to get kids to come across click. So Hamilton's in here, and then the King George response to the Declaration of Independence. I will forever credit a former colleague, Amy Bloom from Oakland Schools, for turning me on to this. She's the one who first told me that this was out there and existed when I was teaching 8th grade US history. I had no idea. And if I had, I would have definitely added it into my my review of 5th grade units, because it's an incredible document, and he just comes off like a jerk. It's great. So thank you, Amy Bloom. I appreciate you for turning me on to this. It's made some great conversations in US history. So with that, I think that ends the breakup letter part. We get into at the end of lesson 2 for the exit ticket. How did the Declaration of Independence change the nature of the American Revolution? What conflicts did it create both internally and externally? This is a exit ticket for kids to kind of think of when they've gone through all of the different activities. Just collect it, scan through their initial thoughts on it, and just use it as a guidepost for, do I need to do anything else with this? Are they getting these major concepts? And then from there, you can move into lesson 3, which I'm not covering in great detail here, but in terms of what you'll find in lesson 3, we have Yorktown, the clean version, as far as the Hamilton connection to sort of bring the Revolutionary War portion to a close. Please note that I put here to turn off closed captioning because it's on by default on mine. And while they bleep out the 2 swear words in it, they don't bleep it out in the closed captioning. So this is one that keeps disappearing every couple of months, and I have to keep finding it, but I make a note to keep coming back to it, because this is a really powerful way to kind of get some goosebump moments in your kids in terms of like how desperate things were and how great Yorktown ended up being, and what the turning point that it was in the war, and then setting the stage again for some of the things that are going to come next. So that's it in a nutshell for Unit 0. And in just a second, we are going to take a break of about 5 minutes. If I can find the tab that has my agenda in it. There we go. So we're going to take a break until, oh, look at that. We are on enough time that I'm going to give you a 7-minute break. We will come back at 5:35, and then I'm going to do an overview of Unit 1, talk a little bit about why we placed some stuff there, give you an overview of lessons 1 through 3, and then we're going to really delve into Phil's locating the capital piece. So everyone take a break, mute yourselves, go grab a drink of water, throw some food down your throat, and we will be back here together at 5:35. All right, I'm going to welcome everybody back, and we are going to start to dig into Unit 1. So Unit 0, like I mentioned before, is the unit that sort of covers and what's the word I'm looking for? I get dumber as the day goes on. So during some of the night sessions, I apologize in advance for anything dumb and stupid I say, but that's what I'm looking for. The Unit 1 is kind of those foundational pieces from 5th grade, and then Unit 1 gets into the fall of the Articles of Confederation and creating a new constitution. So this is where we start to get into the expectations that are actually in the 8th grade US history course. And as I give the unit overview here, I wanted to let you guys know about a really robust conversation that Phil and I had over email all summer long as we were kind of finalizing and updating some of these earlier units. So we'd be working through, and I would get this email from Phil going, everything is wrong with lessons 2 and 3 in Unit 1. And I'm like, wait a minute, huh? No, like we've been teaching these for years. Like, what's going on? And Phil would point out that our compelling and supporting questions for this unit sometimes get a little mixed together. So the unit overview, as I give you that, our compelling question for the whole unit is it possible to create a perfect government that serves all people? And this is a great question. This is a compelling question that I like to call transferable, because while we're using it to talk about eighth grade US history right now, you could ask students about this question today. Like, does our government today serve all the people? And a compelling question is big, it's bold, it's arguable. You can come to multiple conclusions based off of the evidence that you're provided. So I really like this question. And then when you scroll past all the content expectations that we're hitting, which here are all your 3.3s, and here are all your C3 indicators, our supporting questions are very first lesson. So lesson 1 is going to be about why the Articles of Confederation failed. So it's a natural place, right, to go right after the Revolutionary War review. We're like, okay, so after the war, we set up these Articles of Confederation and they're the law of the land for a little while. What happened? But where our robust conversation via email took place was in lessons 2 and 3 and 4, because we have all of those deal with issues. So the Articles of Confederation fall. And so we come together to try to update them, but instead of updating them, we end up building this new constitutional convention. And so the first lesson is really going to get to the heart of what issues started to emerge at the Constitutional Convention. And this is one, I mean, I'll get into the actual lessons in just a minute, but this is one where, we're going to talk about the different plans. You've got the New Jersey plan, you've got the Virginia plan, you've got those. And while those are issues that emerged at the Constitutional Convention, that was also ended up being resolved when we get to federalism. And we talk about that resolution in lesson 2 right alongside with the emerging issues. And then when you get to question 3, we talk about what key issues were resolved. So Phil was like, you really should have this over here. And I'm like, I get it, but it's also stuff that emerged here. And when I personally was teaching 8th grade US history, I didn't separate the two. We talked about the issues well, first of all, we didn't have C3 back then anyway, so I wasn't unifying all my course content under these questions. But I also, when we sat down to develop these units, recognized that it made a lot of sense to talk about those different plans and how we ended up solving it there. So Phil and I had this great discourse over email and the Google Docs. Like, if you can pull open the comments on the Google Docs, you will see some fun arguments between them. And I say arguments with a lot of tongue-in-cheek here, because Phil and I both work with people with huge egos from time to time, and we don't have that with one another. So we just pretty much just say what we're thinking, and the other one knows to just take it as it is and go from there. So if you have access to the comments, which I don't know, you can go in and read some of our arguments when we were updating the units again over the summer. But basically, we then get into what key issues remained unresolved after the Constitutional Convention as our final unifying question for this unit, primarily because that's the can. We use the metaphor of kicking the can down the road all throughout 8th grade and all throughout these units. And the issues that we did not resolve there, a lot of them didn't get resolved for almost 100 years. We had to fight that Civil War. So that can kick becomes a really great metaphor that you can use with your students throughout the year. So my point in bringing this up to you is that if you look at something and the issues that emerged at the Constitutional Convention, and you're like, well, you also talk about the resolution here, shouldn't that go on the next lesson? Feel free to move it if that's what's natural and comfortable to you. But the initial unit authors quit after developing Unit 0 and part of Unit 1. And so Phil and I were asked by Becky to finish the units, and we did. And so 8th grade is pretty much from Unit 3 on, because part of Unit 2 or Unit 1 existed. Sorry, Unit 2 on. Part of Unit 1 existed already. Phil and I put together, and myself having taught the course for as long as I did, I had very strong opinions on where I would put some of these things. And sometimes Phil was like, yep, that makes perfect sense. And sometimes Phil was like, well, if I were doing it, I would put it over here. So If something in 8th grade doesn't make sense to you with where we put it, move it to where it makes most sense. So that's my disclaimer on the Unit 3 overview. Phil, what did I miss? I think I summed up our arguments really nicely, but did I miss anything there that you want to point out to them? All right. So getting into the individual lessons in this unit, we actually have 4. So if you look at the pacing view, this should take about 3 weeks to go through this unit. So with 4 lessons divided by 3, you're looking at about 3.5, 4 days a week for per lesson. So lesson 1 starts to get into the Articles of Confederation, like I mentioned before, and we have here we reference open book again. So we're like, take a look at open book, and then here are some reading guide handouts through a variety of perspectives. This is something the original authors left that I recommend you bookmark and go back to a lot, because they have a whole slew of different reading strategies that you can use and reuse throughout the course of the units. I did not reference them again in later units because I sort of unified under one, but now at the point in time that we're at, with kids and some of that COVID learning loss and things like that, these are some great handouts, which is why we didn't take them out of this unit. They belong there and they belong throughout. We also provide a copy of the Articles of Confederation for kids to kind of take a look at. In this particular case, it's very much like broken down in a way that you could tell kids in a class to get together in groups, and group 1 is going to do articles 2, 3, and 5, and group 2 is going to do these, and group 3 is going to do these. And we tell you, to read through the Articles of Confederation with partners or in groups and list the details that they feel as they're reading, like people might not be able to get behind. Each state will have 1 vote. We also know that becomes a constitutional convention issue that emerges, and eventually it gets resolved when you have, the House of Representatives and the Senate. But you've got bigger states that are like, hey, how come my vote counts as much as Rhode Island or one of these tiny little states without as many people? So these are the sorts of things we hope kids will come away from after reading through this. So we don't expect them to read and take in every word from the standpoint of they're going to memorize the Articles of Confederation, and 20 years from now, you will see them at a reunion and you'll go, hey, what was Article 5 of the Articles of Confederation? No, we don't want them to do that. We just want them to read it and think about, what are the hangups here? Like, why did these things fail? Like, what were the things that people didn't like about some of those? And that's why we don't have all of the articles here either. We kind of picked and choose to make our point. Also going through here, we get into a little bit on the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, and they're referencing Open Book Project here. So this will actually take you out to that chapter of Open Books that you can read there. Shays Rebellion is a huge part of that. So we've got a video here that kind of covers and goes through that. And then we revisit some of these historical documents, and we're going to revisit them again multiple times through some of the lessons about what are some of the documents that ended up, influencing us as we started to form the nation. So it's kind of a nice little list of the examples may include, but are not limited to, from your content expectations, with a couple of extra ones in here, just to sort of get kids thinking about what some of these things are. They're not going to read these in your class. They're going to read these things in high school civics when they're a lot more ready for it. So we just want them to know the Magna Carta was this, and this is what we took from it. And the English Bill of Rights was this, and this is what we took from it. So continuing through as we get into lesson 2 of this, it's really easy with Giants because we open everything in new tabs. It's really easy with Giants to end up with 100 tabs open in your web browser really fast. And I like to close them before I get memory errors. So we start to get into the Constitution itself and creating the Constitution. And you can see I accidentally left one of our comments in there, so I'm going to get that out of there now because I literally gave the disclaimer Phil wanted me to give just a couple of minutes ago. But we actually have kids read the preamble. Even though we're talking about the Constitutional Convention, we want them to sort of start with that end in mind and think about what's in the preamble, and then did they live up to what is printed in the preamble really throughout the document. So We also get into some stuff on clickable maps, which will be very helpful when you start to talk about the Three-Fifths Compromise and how that came. And then we get into this federalism piece where we get into the different proposals and what specifically did we end up with to resolve that. So if you don't want that there, move it to the next lesson. It's also at the end of this lesson, so your kids will never know either way. That's another compromise Phil and I made, was I moved it to the very end of this so that it does segue nicely into that. See, Phil, I do listen to you. I do. I do listen to you, I promise. All right. Phil has become my father over the years, and to my dying day, I will always appreciate all the wisdom he has imparted to me, even though I push back on him sometimes. So, the third lesson, we get into what key issues were resolved at the Constitutional Convention. So, this is where we start to talk about, this is where we get into that, and we start to talk about the Federalists and Anti-Federalists and some of their different ideas about where they wanted to go. We revisit historical documents again. We talk about the Electoral College a little bit. I will never forget the year the Electoral College showed up on the MSTEP as the writing prompt, back when we had the writing prompt on the MEP tests. I think I was student teaching that year. And I remember just reading over my kids' shoulders. I was student teaching. It was at Maple Street Magnet School for the Arts in Kalamazoo. The student teaching, I'm reading over my kids' shoulders, and they're all writing about how everyone should go to college. And I'm like, oh, like, I love your idealism, but that's not what we're talking about here. And, I had to ask my mentor teacher, did you teach the Electoral College? She's like, no, because the standards were a little different then. So it was later on in the year that she was going to get to that. So so we made sure we talked about the Electoral College here for a lot of reasons. Plus, its prominence has really grown, since 2000. We have now had 3 different elections where things have gone really, really wonky with the 2 elections where things have gone really, really wonky. Hopefully we don't get to 3. I would like the 2 that we've had to be the only ones that we ever have, but still, so it's an important thing and its prominence is there. So we've got some stuff on the Electoral College. I love 270 to win. So it's kind of a bonus activity. We send kids out there to sort of take a look at what's there, what can you do with it. Here's where people are already starting to put together their predictions for 2024. This would load, which is not going to do because I'm doing it live via a Zoom. So that's fine. We'll keep moving. We get into this handout on the different branches of government. So this is where you're going to study all the different articles that came out in the Constitution. We've got a Constitution flip chart activity, lots of good stuff, lots of familiar stuff for you. And then in lesson 4, we get into this idea of, what key issues remained unresolved after the Constitutional Convention. And from there, we start to get into constitutional compromises. There's a great new crash course from some of the new ones that came out. He still talks really fast, even though it's not John Green. So either turn the speed down to 0.75 so it sounds normal. But it really starts to talk about all those compromises and does a nice job of prefacing which ones were resolved and which were not resolved. We get into the Bill of Rights here because some of the stuff wasn't resolved at the convention, but it was resolved with the addition of and ratification of the Bill of Rights. And then just to kind of end things off, we have 2 different activities. The fun activity here, which founding father are you? This founding fathers quiz like you'd find in the old Cosmopolitan magazines. This is really for one of those days where you're like, the day's been broken up by assemblies and you've got like 10 minutes left at the end of class. Like, this is not a mandated, you must do this, but we thought it was kind of fun, to see which founding father you might be most like. I was surprised to find I'm Madison. I would not have guessed Madison. Everyone wants to be George Washington, but we can't all be Washington. So, so which founding father are you? That might be your homework between session 1 and 2 to come back and tell us which founding father you are. I'm kidding, it won't be, but it's fun. Find out which one you are. And then Phil's going to talk about this, where we put the capital activity, in just a moment. Actually, right now, because it is 5:50 exactly. So What I'm going to do is I'm going to I will take questions at the end after Phil because we've got that time built in for questions. And I'm going to turn things over to Phil to kind of wrap up our content for the evening with this really cool where do we put our capital activity. So, Phil, over to you. And you are muted. I will cut that part out of the final video too.
There.
There we go.
Video and audio, both there. How about that? He mentioned the word clickable maps. And this is one of the features that we built into most of Giants, was to have access to a suite of maps that were customizable, where you could literally build the map that you want to have to either show on the screen, you can screen capture it, or even to print it out as a handout in order to guide particular things. And I'll show you a couple of those clickable maps. I want to preface that with a kind of a personal statement about activities in a classroom, particularly in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And that is that when I was teaching all three of those grades in one room, I realized that you simply couldn't do the same thing 2 days in a row and get away with it very often. That there's a kind of a boredom threshold that just shows up, and you need to think of a different way to approach something. That was the reason partly for the development of the Where Do We Locate game that we did an hour ago, where it's a whole class simulation wrapped around an individual projected PowerPoint. What the DC activity, locating the capital, is about is a individual inquiry activity that then comes together over a single question. And to guide that, there's an introductory PowerPoint, but that third column in your Giants handout has got 4 or 5 different resources in it. There's an introductory PowerPoint that you'll actually show the kids. And then there's 2 more PowerPoints that are basically a way to assemble a bunch of frames that you can use in a whole variety of different ways. And I'm going to try to model that a little bit. Now, I've run this DC game. This is one of the ones where I counted it up one time because I had to put something on a grant proposal. I've run this DC game now in 22 different states at grade levels that range from 5th grade through senior and high school. And I've done a bunch of teacher workshops with it. So I've seen a lot of groups as they've reacted to it. And we keep tweaking on it in order to figure out how it might work. But that gives me a chance to say, we're trying to provide the materials that you use, but we're not telling you how to use them. That there's a variety of different ways in which you could structure this game. I'm going to model just one of those ways, and then we'll mention it a little bit later on. And with that, I'm going to introduce locating the capital. Try to leave enough time that we can look at a couple clickable maps that you might use before locating the capital or after locating it, or even right at the beginning of this unit 1. So with that, a slideshow on how do we locate the capital. Like I say, this is the one that you might use as a presentation for your students, but you might not. Depends on how much you want them to know about what the other groups are doing within the room. So, the year is 1790. The Constitution has been adopted. And we think we've solved most of the problems because we've survived as a union through 2 huge compromises. And we've created this, we've created a weird plan that is cascading all the way into the 20th century, called the fact that we give the House of Representatives based on population and the Senate based on the number of states, and they don't necessarily agree with each other. And we've had a compromise about counting 3/5 of, anyway, you know what the compromises are about. What we didn't have time to do is to decide where we're going to locate the capital of this country. Right now, it's kind of tentatively parked in Philadelphia. So where are we going to do this? Now, popular history books, the folks that, I kind of like The Story of Us by Joy Hakem. It's a series of books about that. And they talk about this interesting story about how old Tommy Jefferson called Alex Hamilton and Jimmy Madison together, and we're all going to have supper one time, and we're going to solve the problems of the world, especially since Tommy Jefferson has got a nice little vineyard out back that will lubricate this discussion. Anyway, that's the popular story that we worked out. It seems a little bit too easy. Did it really work out that way? And that's me as a geographer questioning a historical narrative. Let's keep that story in mind as we look at the geography of this country, because we're going to use that idea about that compromise as a way to explore the geography of the country, and then use the geography of the country to explore why the compromise was so easy. And the refusal to address the issue of slavery eventually led to a civil war and continues to influence voting today. So, the way this game is played is that you've got a package of printed handouts, numbered from 1 through 9 like that. Each group gets one of two versions of a background map if you think they need it. And the background map simply identifies the location of the individual colonies at the time. And then it asks a few questions about that so that they get an idea of where they are relative to each other. This is just a way of getting them to look at the map. Then there is a handout that explains the problem, and it provides suggestions for where this capital might locate it. And you can either give them that handout, I didn't show it on the screen here, or you can just hold it back and say, we're going to leave this completely open-ended. We're not going to even have a candidate list of cities. The delegates that came to the convention actually at one time or another mentioned 21 different cities that they thought should be the capital. And among them, there were a whole bunch of people that were in favor of some of them. So we broke that down into a set of geography questions about it. And each of the maps has information about a specific topic of colonial geography. Now, you might want to be a little bit strategic based upon the answers that your kids gave in the game at the beginning. Whether they focused primarily upon the strategic location of the fort, or whether they focused on the physical environment, the mountains and the rivers and so on, or whether they focused on the cultural environment, the location of the enemies relative to you and things like that. Based on your diagnosis in that game, you might strategically hand individual students one of these. So I'm just going to show what all of the different maps look like after I make one more sentence. And the one more sentence is, each map also introduces a different map or graphic skill. And that might also influence how you hand these things out. So one group gets some information about the climate in this place. And they're asked to analyze it by counting up the number of months that are too hot and the months that are too cold. You have to remember, this is back when we did not have central heating, and we certainly didn't have air conditioning. And there were people that said, we can't possibly locate the capital in Boston because it's just too cold, and the delegates are all going to freeze to death, and Well, couldn't possibly locate it down in Georgia because it's too hot and they're never going to get anything done. They're just going to be sitting out in the shade and panning them. You get the idea that at that particular time, climate was a bigger determinant on what you could do in different places. And one of these groups is given a set of graphs to analyze the climate and to classify it. And then based on the climate, they're going to pick where they think the capital should be. The next group gets a map of population, and their job is to say, where within this population would we want this capital? Would we want it, in a crowded area, or do we want to have it way out somewhere else? And you know that Great Britain, for example, located its capital in the most crowded part. Brazil deliberately chose to locate its capital in an unpopulated area, so that it wouldn't be influenced by the people that are immediately around. It wouldn't have other economic activities going on. So this group builds a set of graphs, and then they're supposed to use those graphs as part of a presentation or a poster or an oral discussion in where they think we're going to locate the capital. The third group is given a map of the cities that exist right now, and they're asked to classify the cities into 3 groups. This is a very common problem with map making in general, is where do you draw the line between the groups? Because you can make a map say different things if you draw the line in different places. And so they go through that process. They're told that these are what you call a small city, and this is a large city, and then you've got to name all the rest of them, and then you've got to make the map that looks like it. Now, I'm going to show you another PowerPoint that has all of these maps done, but that's, of course, what the kids are supposed to be doing. Another map gets a measure of the slave population, that how many thousand slaves were in each colony at that particular time. And their job is to make a map of that and then to use that map to decide where they think the capital ought to be. Another group looks at what the people are growing in the different parts and whether what they're growing is for their own use or for export. At the time that the Constitutional Convention, exporting tobacco from Virginia was the single biggest moneymaker in the colonies. And that gave Virginia a particular perspective on what exactly they wanted to do, in terms of taxation and some of the regulation of trade and so on. When we mentioned trade, the last group, second last group, actually has to figure out which colonies were making money by trade and which ones were actually losing money by that. And then the last group looked at Revolutionary War debt. Now, all of these issues were actually mentioned at the time of the Constitutional Convention by different delegates as to some of the reasons they had for some of the decisions that they made. I didn't do that research. That was all done with a NASA-funded project called Mission Geography back in the 90s. And that was the very first time we saw this game. And then we've been developing it ever since then. So if we were in a 3-hour workshop somewhere, I would just turn all of you loose right now, grab one of these maps, make it, and see what happens. We're not in a 3-hour workshop. You guys would like to, disappear sometime between 6:30 and 7:30. So I'm just going to say each group working independently, or individuals, if you want to even break it down finer than that, tries to choose a good location for the capital based on the specific information that they have on their map or graph. Remember, every one of those kinds of information was a criteria that was mentioned at the convention. And half of them were going to, things like debt and trade and slavery and so on are going to continue to plague the country for the next 100 years or so. Like Dave said, part of the organizing metaphor that we've got is that we keep kicking the can down the road a little bit. So, spoiler alert, at least one delegate used every bit of this information to influence their vote at that time. And then finally, the groups had to get together, compare information, and try to come up with a compromise location. Yeah, like I say, we have a teacher packet for you that has a whole bunch of visuals that can demonstrate that skill. And when it's all done, we can try to identify what message we learned from the Great Compromise. So with that, let me wander over to show what the teacher files just look like. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time with this content. The whole point of this was to make this available. So the people that worked through the climate one would basically come up with numbers like that. And they found out that Washington, D.C. had the fewest number of bad months of all of these cities that were named here. The people that had the topography map were noticing something that your textbook talks about, and that is that before we had diesel engines and electric motors, a waterfall was your major source of power, and almost every one of the important cities of the time were located where they would have a waterfall available. So this didn't really nail you down, except that you were not going to pick a city that was sitting out here where you didn't have a waterfall, because you wouldn't be able to, run some of the industry that you need, like lumber milling and flour milling and stuff like that. The people who were looking at population and making a graph of that would see that the center of the population just seems to fall right here in Pennsylvania. If they did that not with the graph, but with the map, sure enough, the middle of the population falls right about on that border between Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. People that were looking at the cities had their own reaction to where they were, that it would be better to have your breaks between large, medium, and small, but it would probably be a good idea not to have it a big city, because you had so many more people that were living in the small cities at the time. There was a very strong groundswell saying, we don't care where the capital particularly goes, except we do not want it in New York or Philadelphia or Boston or Charleston or Baltimore. We want it someplace else. So they built that map key. The ones that had the slavery information would build a graph that looks like this, and look here, that the border between the non-slave region and the North Slave region turns out to be about on the Pennsylvania line here. That would show up whether you do it graphically or by coloring the map according to the percentages of the slaves there. And like I say, part of this is just slowly building into the kids' consciousness what these geographic patterns look like. Where the fall line was, where the climate was, where the slavery, the line between slave and freed states, and so on. If they took a look at trade, they're going to find out that the only states that were actually making money trading were right down here, that there is a line between Pennsylvania and Virginia between states that were losing a lot of money on trade, they were importing more than they were exporting, and states that were gaining money from trade. And that influenced some of their decisions in the Constitution about the regulation of commerce. That can be shown either graphically or with the maps by graduating the arrows. You notice how the imports are a lot bigger than the exports here, and then the exports become bigger than the imports when you go south of that line. And then finally, when you take a look at the map of the debt, the big division between the debtor and the creditor regions turns out to be right about there. In other words, 8 different groups used 8 different criteria to come up with their idea about where the capital should be, and all of those criteria pointed to the same location, that you ought to build the capital somewhere about right there between Pennsylvania and Virginia on that border. So the story is that Hamilton and Jefferson came up with this great compromise. The truth is, they came up with a couple suggestions that they presented to the convention, and this one happened to resonate with just about everybody's opinion about where the capital ought to be. That the different geographies of the country pointed toward a location in roughly the same place. And like I say, that's a resource packet for you guys to use, and you can present that as information. Then there's one more PowerPoint over here that just goes through how you design and make a temperature graph, a line graph, a dot map, and so on. And so you can, I'm not even going to load that PowerPoint up. I'm just going to say it talks about dot maps, talks about spatial patterns, it talks about the aura of a city and what that means. It talks about the balance of trade. And I think at the end of this thing, I even have Jefferson's letter about death and as a primary document that you can look at. So one PowerPoint to present to the kids, one PowerPoint for you to tear apart and incorporate within your own PowerPoint if you want to, or just use to help evaluate what your students have produced when they do their individual activities. What we found is that the individual activities are simple enough that most 7th or 8th grade students can do the activity in about 15 minutes. So you can present it for 10 minutes, have them do it for about 15 minutes, and then you've got 15 minutes left for discussion in a particular period, and it all fits into one class period if you want. Or you can make it as a take-home activity where they do their own presentation at home and come back and pretend that they're in a constitutional convention and make the presentation to each other. Or you can think of another way to do it and explain to me how you did it and how well it worked. Because our job is to give you the raw materials, not to tell you how to use them. And with that, let me point to another raw material that we have called a clickable map. And one of the clickable maps that you might want to use is a clickable map about basic geography of the United States. This basically lets you put up what the growing season looks like, or where the large plantations were when we get closer to the Civil War, or where the Corn Belt was, or where the big population areas are, and so on. And a clickable map lets you put 1 or 2 or 3 things on at the same time. Maybe see that the Confederate States turned out to be the ones that had plantations, but not corn, and things like that. Or you can clear it off. Now, that's one easy clickable map. The one that you might want to use while you're doing this, where do we locate the capital, is the one about the U.S., the colonies, in the late 1700s. So I can turn the land green so that it's a little bit easier to see some of these other things. Maybe put the Great Lakes on so we can find things like that. Oh, it might be cool to put the rivers on here too. And then you've got access to a whole lot of other information, like where is the slave population at the time? You know, how does that compare with the total population? In fact, you can put them both on, and it actually shows for each dot what fraction of that county was slaves. You could put up the location of the possible capitals that had been suggested and where people were raising tobacco. Well, you can't see the tobacco very well, so let's clear the map off and put the tobacco plantations on there. In other words, we're giving you a very flexible resource so you can construct a map that you might want to use. And then if you want to actually have that be semi-permanent, write to Dave and we'll try to figure out some way that you can actually get a wall map of that for about $20 that is made on a vinyl that you can write on with erasable markers and put all kinds of information on what it looked like. I'm trying to get some light on it and still have you see what it looks like here. Like I say, we're trying to give you some resources that you can use in a very flexible way and a game format about locating the capital that makes the transition between the Constitutional Convention and the rest of your course, which talks about how do we resolve issues of trade, slavery, population expansion, and so on. So, with that, any questions?
Is there a way to maybe print the map once you have all the items on there that you want it to have?
To print it? Yeah, some computers you can just click print screen right there, and you've got what you need.
Right.
And that's probably the easiest way. Is that it's the way I choose to do it. Is to do a print screen and then load it into a PowerPoint or your own graphic software or into Word. That it's just a JPEG when you've done that print screen.
And Susan, if you have a modern version of Windows, which I always have to say that like that because school districts, I still have some in my zone that are like still running Windows XP. But if you have like Windows 10 or Windows 11 on your school computer, there's a snipping tool in there that you can use that just like it turns your whole screen dark and you click on the part of it that you want and then you can put it into a Word document pretty easily.
Yeah. And some computers you can just hit P for print and it'll print what you see on the screen at the moment. Stop share.
You're doing the clickable map overview because I put them together, but you are the one who dreamed all of these things up. So when I roll these out to people, I always feel like I'm forgetting something majorly important because I wasn't the creator of them. So I'm really glad that you did that overview. And guys, all of those clickable maps are free. They're never going to cost any money, anything like that. They're just out there. They're free, and they'll work on any device. So. All right, the last part of the agenda tonight, and I may be giving you guys the gift of time here in just a sec, because this isn't a 13-minute part of the presentation. This is just a kind of a quick overview. The other new thing this year, so we're updating the units as we go. We did some updates beforehand. We're doing more updates as we kind of prepare for each network. And the big new thing this time around is assessment. So on the agenda, and we keep it on the agenda instead of inline in the units because we don't want kids to Google and find the answers. That's not as much of a problem with 5th grade, but I taught 8th grade for a really long time. And these kids, I would say probably halfway through their 6th grade year, they're going to start Googling things and finding answers. So we keep it behind a gatekeeper, and I am that gatekeeper. So if you ever lose this agenda, first up, star this agenda so you can access it all year. I will send it out each time, but we're going to operate from the same agenda document. So it'll be the same Zoom link every time, and the assessment folder will always be a part of it. But let's say 2-3 years from now, you're going back, you're like, gosh, I remember he said something about assessments. Or in Rachel's case and in Derek's case, we have assessments for 5th grade and 7th grade and 6th grade all in there as well. So if you need those, I can share those folders with you. We just keep them behind lock and key so people can't find them and find the answer keys. So it is a link to our Giants Google shared folder here, and it is basically we have a assessment that covers unit 0 and unit 1, and then one assessment that covers each of the additional units that we go through. So for this particular unit, you're also going to notice that it is done in Google Slides. It is done in Google Slides for a variety of reasons. One, you could print it if you wanted them to do it pencil and paper. But if there's one thing that is a silver lining to the pandemic, maybe, and I always chuckle when I say something like that because I'm not certain that there is ever any silver lining to a pandemic, but there's so much technology at use in the classroom now that you can also give this as a in Google Drive and just push it out to your students if you're using Google Classroom, or put copy at the end of it. And if you're using Schoology or something else, they click on it and it will create a copy of it that they can then share back with you. So they can do this digitally or they can do this in print. But a lot of the questions started as PASST. If you've ever been introduced to the PAST project, a lot of the questions started as PASST items, but have also grown and morphed from there. So if you do this virtually, they can just make a copy of their own slide deck and they can just slide and move and put things in the right place, or, and if they are not, if you want it printed, they can draw arrows, they can write it in the boxes, like it's up to you. But we also have a place for them to type. So you just click on this and, poof, you can type your answers there. And because these first two units are short, these are really short. This is really a short test. It's a grand total of 21 questions over the course of 6 slides. And we counted each one of these drag and drop ones as one question. So basically, if they get one of those wrong, I would take it down by a point. But, otherwise, it's all in there. The one thing I did not create that I can, if you guys want it, are answer key documents. Some grade levels want them, some grade levels don't care. In this particular case, I had a teacher piloting some of these last year who wanted answer keys for 5th grade. So all the 5th grade ones have answer keys. Same deal, I believe, with all the 7th grade ones. I didn't create an answer key for 8th grade, but I can create an answer key pretty quickly if it would make your lives easier. So as you use this, let me know, and I'll take the feedback next time on how you use the assessments, if you use them at all. But we definitely wanted to add some additional value to the units doing these rollouts again. So in addition to new activities, there's a full set of assessments available for you as well. So that's it for my assessment portion, and that is actually pretty much it for the networks tonight. When we come back together next time, it is not back to back with the 5th grade network. There's a day in between. I have to, for all of my ISDs, I have to start planning my dates for each ISD that I service in March of each year. And Phil and I had not even decided definitively if we were going to do 5th and 8th grade rollouts at that point. So there is a night of professional learning that I will be offering at West Shore ESD in Ludington on the Wednesday next month. So it'll be, I'm just pulling up on my calendar here, the 5th grade network, for Derek's sake, will be on the, where is it? The 24th of October. And our next meeting for 8th grade is on the 26th. That's the only one that's going to appear on a Thursday. The rest of my calendar was clear. So when we come back next month, we're going to really dive into Unit 2. We're going to show you some of the things that make the early presidents tick. And as far as sketches go, I took attendance while Phil was going. So at the end of all of this, you'll get sketches for everyone that you attend. So if you attend all 6 of them, you'll get 12 sketches. Otherwise, we just prorate from there. So we have changed the format of this to have the last hour be for questions if there are any. So I'm going to officially close the network right now. And thank you guys for your time and attendance this evening. And then I'm going to stop the recording, and Phil and I will stay on as long as